The day I found a $5,000 electric bill in my mailbox, I knew my HOA had just declared war on the wrong electrician. Let me paint you a picture. I'm standing in my driveway, work boots crunching on gravel, still smelling like sawdust and honest sweat. My hands, the same ones that have wired half this neighborhood, are trembling with rage as I hold this piece of paper that's about to steal my daughter's future. $5,000. For electricity. In a house where I religiously flip off every light switch because every dollar saved is another dollar towards Sage's college dreams. Here's what these HOA vultures didn't know. I've been an electrician for 30 years. I can spot electrical fraud from 3 blocks away. And lady, when you try to scam someone who understands exactly how power flows through every wire in this neighborhood, well, you just gave me the tools for your own destruction. The metallic taste of fury filled my mouth as those automatic sprinklers hissed to life across the street, paid for with our HOA fees while they were literally stealing the electricity from under our noses. What would you do if your HOA tried to bankrupt you overnight? Drop a comment if you've ever fantasized about taking down petty tyrants and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Dalton Reed, and I'm what you might call an old-school electrician. 3rd generation, actually. My grandfather taught my father taught me, and I've been running current through walls since I was 16. But this story isn't about wiring houses, it's about wiring justice. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah in a car accident that turned my world upside down and inside out. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. Ironic, considering I'm the one who actually knows how to wire the lights. The insurance settlement was substantial, but every dollar felt like blood money. Sarah always said she wanted our daughter Sage to have every opportunity she never had. So standing at her graveside, breathing in that heavy scent of funeral flowers and fresh dirt, I made a promise. Our girl would get her education, no matter what it took. That's how we ended up in Pinecrest Estates, a neighborhood so perfect it looked like it was photoshopped. You know the type, lawns so manicured you could perform surgery on them, houses that gleamed like they were detailed daily, and an HOA that promised maintaining property values through community standards, which in plain English means we're going to micromanage your life and charge you $180 a month for the privilege. I bought a modest ranch house, nothing that would make the neighbors jealous, but clean and safe with good schools nearby. The kind of place where a 17-year-old girl could focus on calculus instead of worrying about whether her old man was falling apart. Enter Cordelia Blackwood, HOA president and professional pain in everyone's rear end. Picture every nightmare HOA story you've ever heard, then add a business degree and the personality of a parking meter. She drove a white Lexus with vanity plates reading "Ho Rain." And yes, she actually thought that was clever. This woman had the audacity to measure grass height with an actual ruler, like she was performing cardiac surgery. She wore pressed khakis to walk to her mailbox and somehow made "good morning" sound like a court summons. Her house was this massive colonial with a circular driveway, and she treated the rest of us 846 homeowners like we were renting space in her personal kingdom. For the first few months, I played by the rules, kept my head down, maintained my property, and paid those monthly fees without complaint. The sound of kids playing and the smell of barbecues made it feel like we'd found our new normal. Then I made my first mistake. After hearing about break-ins in the area, I installed a basic security camera. Nothing fancy, just something to keep Sage safe when I was working late jobs. But apparently Cordelia considered this an unauthorized exterior modification, punishable by $150 fine. When I checked our 847-page covenant document, yes, I actually read the whole thing because that's what responsible homeowners do, security devices were explicitly allowed. So I walked over to Cordelia's house like a reasonable adult seeking reasonable discussion. Standing in her marble foyer, listening to her heels click against the floor like a countdown timer to my doom, I realized reason had left the building. "Interpretation is the board's discretion," she announced, arms crossed, looking at me like I'd tracked motor oil through her precious entryway. That was the beginning of what I now call death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every week brought fresh violations. Grass too long at 3.2 inches when the limit was 3.0. Mailbox the wrong shade of black. Matte instead of semi-gloss, apparently. Garden hose visible from the street even though it was coiled neatly beside my house. Each violation, $150 plus $25 processing fee. My housing costs climbed from reasonable to ridiculous, and I watched Sage's face tighten with worry every time another envelope arrived with that dreaded HOA logo. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because what came next would turn this from harassment into all-out war. The $5,000 electric bill that changed everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked genuinely apologetic as he handed me the thick manila envelope. 6 a.m. sharp, right when Sage was getting ready for school, scrambling eggs that filled our kitchen with the comforting smell of butter and normalcy. The timing wasn't accidental. Cease and desist blazed across the top in bold red letters, followed by the letterhead of Pemberton and Associates. I remembered reading somewhere that attorney letters are like expensive perfume. The fancier the packaging, the more it's trying to mask something rotten underneath. This one reeked of desperation disguised as authority. The demand was simple. Pay the $5,247.83 electric bill within 10 days, or face a property lien for repeated covenant violations. Additional penalties were already accruing, they claimed, like interest on a loan shark's debt. Through my kitchen window, I watched Cordelia standing at her own window 3 houses down, sipping coffee from bone china, probably savoring every moment of my apparent distress. The morning sun caught her satisfied smile, and I could practically taste the metallic bitterness of her vindictive triumph. What she didn't know was that I'd already started connecting the dots. Years ago, when I was apprenticing under my father, he taught me something that stuck. Son, when someone claims your electrical work is causing problems, you don't argue, you investigate, because electricity doesn't lie, even when people do. That wisdom served me well in 30 years of troubleshooting, and it was about to serve me again. So I did what any reasonable electrician would do when faced with a suspicious bill. I went to the county courthouse and started digging through public records. The musty smell of old documents and the scratch of pencil on paper reminded me of researching building codes for complex jobs. What I found made my blood pressure spike higher than an overloaded circuit. The HOA's electric policy change, never properly filed. I'd learned from a particularly nasty dispute with a contractor years back that any fee increase requires 60 days written notice and majority homeowner approval. Emergency powers are limited to actual emergencies, not someone's side business expenses. But here's where my electrician instincts really kicked in. I pulled the clubhouse's electric usage records for the past year, and the numbers screamed fraud louder than a fire alarm. A 340% increase over 6 months? For a building that hosts monthly bingo nights and the occasional kid's birthday party? Time to call in a favor. Jake Morales and I survived trade school together 20 years ago, bonding over terrible cafeteria coffee and the shared misery of memorizing the National Electrical Code. He'd been reading meters for the utility company ever since, and I'd rewired his kitchen last Christmas as a thank you for all the times he'd helped me track down mysterious power issues. "Something's seriously wrong with these numbers, brother," Jake whispered that evening, meeting me in the Home Depot parking lot where the smell of lumber and possibility always cleared my head. "That clubhouse meter is reading like it's powering a small manufacturing plant, not a community center." We agreed to meet that night for a closer inspection. Midnight in suburbia has its own electric symphony. The steady hum of air conditioners, the distant buzz of streetlights, and the occasional pop of a transformer settling into its nighttime rhythm. Jake and I approached the clubhouse like a couple of electrical detectives, armed with flashlights and 3 decades of combined experience spotting code violations. What we found behind the decorative hedge would have made any honest electrician's stomach turn. Someone had jerry-rigged an illegal jumper cable setup, bypassing the main meter to feed power directly to an external source. The work was not just sloppy, it was dangerous, the kind of amateur wiring that starts house fires and kills people. Even worse, the meter itself had been tampered with, artificially inflated to make the clubhouse appear to consume massive amounts of electricity. "This is straight-up felony territory," Jake said, photographing the evidence with hands that shook slightly from anger. "Someone's stealing power and making the whole neighborhood pay for it." I stared at those illegal connections, feeling puzzle pieces snap together with an almost audible click. Cordelia's pottery business. That industrial kiln I'd glimpsed through her garage windows. The suspicious spike in shared utility costs that started exactly when her online ceramics shop began advertising handcrafted pieces fired in professional kilns. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Pay up or lose your house. You have 9 days left." I looked at Jake and felt my first genuine smile in weeks spread across my face. You know what? I think she just handed me the keys to her own downfall. Because here's what petty tyrants never understand. When you corner someone who actually knows what they're doing, you don't get surrender. You get a masterclass in consequences. And Cordelia Blackwood was about to discover what happens when you try to steal electricity from someone who's spent his entire life making sure power flows exactly where it's supposed to go. Game on. The ambush came Thursday morning disguised as routine bureaucracy. I was in my workshop, breathing in the familiar cocktail of metal shavings and electrical tape adhesive, when the doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of someone who expected immediate answers. Through the peephole, I saw a city inspector clutching a clipboard like a shield, his face wearing that particular expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Randy Kowalski had been doing code enforcement for 15 years, long enough to recognize a setup when he saw one. "Sorry about this, Mr. Reed," he muttered, avoiding eye contact while sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Got 3 separate complaints filed yesterday about commercial vehicle storage and unauthorized business operations." The timing was surgical. Sage was at our kitchen table, SAT prep books spread around her like battle plans, when she heard the official-sounding conversation at our front door. I watched her shoulders tense, that 17-year-old brain already calculating how this might derail her college dreams. "3 complaints?" I asked, though the chess move was obvious. "Filed within an hour of each other," Randy confirmed, checking his clipboard. "Cordelia Blackwood, Patricia Hendricks, and Robert Fitzpatrick." That's when I knew Cordelia had made her first real mistake. See, when you spend decades troubleshooting electrical problems, you develop an eye for things that don't add up. I'd rewired Patricia Hendricks' kitchen 18 months ago while she was in Florida caring for her dying mother. And Bob Fitzpatrick? Poor guy had been laid up with hip surgery for 6 weeks, pumped full of enough painkillers to make signing his own name a challenge, let alone HOA complaint forms. But somehow their signatures had materialized on documents filed yesterday. As if responding to some invisible signal, Cordelia appeared at my gate with the kind of perfect timing that screamed surveillance. She carried her own clipboard, because of course she did, and wore that predatory smile of someone about to watch their trap snap shut. "Inspector Kowalski," she called out, her voice dripping with false concern. "I do hope you'll be thorough. We simply cannot allow commercial operations to compromise our residential integrity." Randy shot me a look that said he'd seen this particular movie before and it never had a happy ending for anyone involved. But procedure was procedure, so we conducted the grand tour of my garage workshop. What Randy found was exactly what any reasonable person would expect: a clean, organized workspace with standard residential electrical service. Nothing exotic, nothing dangerous, nothing remotely commercial. My father had hammered home the importance of proper workshop setup during my apprenticeship, teaching me that 220-volt service, the same voltage that powers electric dryers and air conditioners, was perfectly legal and safe when properly installed. "This is textbook residential setup," Randy announced after testing my electrical connections. "Everything's properly grounded, up to code, permits all filed correctly." I watched Cordelia's confidence flicker like a fluorescent bulb about to burn out. She'd expected a slam-dunk violation that would force me to dismantle my livelihood. Instead, she was getting a public education in the difference between actual building codes and imaginary HOA authority. But she wasn't finished playing her hand. "What about insurance implications?" Cordelia pressed, desperation creeping into her voice like moisture into bad wiring. "Surely business equipment voids residential coverage?" Now that was actually smart. Wrong, but smart. I'd researched this exact question when setting up my first workshop because insurance companies are like electrical shorts. They'll find any excuse to cause problems. But home workshops for personal use are specifically protected under standard homeowner policies, as long as you're not running a full manufacturing operation or storing hazardous materials. Randy patiently explained the legal realities while I watched Cordelia's face cycle through the 5 stages of bureaucratic grief. She'd built this whole elaborate trap, complete with forged signatures and coordinated timing, only to discover that following actual laws tends to protect law-abiding citizens. "Mrs. Blackwood," Randy said with the weary patience of someone who'd clearly tangled with her before, "unless Mr. Reed starts manufacturing circuit breakers in there, his workshop is perfectly legal." After Randy left with a clean inspection report, I sat in my workshop thinking about patterns and tells. In electrical work, you learn to trace problems back to their source by following the evidence methodically. Every short circuit leaves clues. Every overload has a cause. Cordelia's desperation was showing. The forged signatures, the detailed surveillance of my schedule, the escalation from petty harassment to legal intimidation. She was acting like someone with a lot more to hide than pottery hobby expenses. I pulled out my phone and called Jake. Remember those meter readings? I need historical data going back 2 years. Every reading, every anomaly, every suspicious pattern. Finally ready to go nuclear? Jake's voice carried anticipation mixed with professional excitement. Not nuclear, I said, staring at the electrical diagram I'd been sketching while thinking through the evidence. Surgical, because if I'm right about what Cordelia's been doing, she's not just stealing electricity, she's been running a systematic fraud operation for years. Time to stop playing defense and start dissecting the real problem, one wire at a time. The foreclosure papers arrived like a guided missile aimed straight at my daughter's future. I was helping Sage practice interview answers in our kitchen, the air thick with her nervous energy and the bitter smell of overbrewed coffee, when the doorbell rang with that particular aggressive rhythm of official business. Through the window, I spotted a process server checking his watch and our address twice, the kind of deliberate timing that screamed maximum psychological impact. "Emergency board meeting results," he announced, shoving legal papers into my hands like they were contaminated. Property lien filed for accumulated violations totaling $12,847. 48 hours to respond or face foreclosure proceedings. Sage's face drained of color faster than a blown fuse. Her most important college interview was scheduled to start in exactly 8 minutes. The admissions counselor from State University calling to discuss her engineering program application. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was surgical. I scanned the documents while Sage locked herself in her bedroom, trying to sound confident and future-focused while her world crumbled in the next room. The emergency board meeting had allegedly occurred Tuesday evening with Patricia Hendricks, Robert Fitzpatrick, and Cordelia Blackwood voting unanimously to destroy our lives. The same Patricia who was still in Florida nursing her dying mother. The same Robert who'd been floating on post-surgery pain medication for 6 weeks, barely coherent enough to sign his own prescriptions, let alone HOA foreclosure documents. But Cordelia's desperation had made her sloppy. The violation list included unauthorized high-voltage industrial equipment creating neighborhood safety hazards, referring to my 220-volt workshop. Back in trade school, they'd beaten it into our heads that high voltage starts at 1,000 volts, making my setup about as industrial as a household clothes dryer. Any competent attorney would laugh this out of court. More revealing was the financial breakdown. My original violations, maybe $800 in legitimate disputes, had magically multiplied into nearly $13,000 through late fees, administrative penalties, and emergency assessment costs. The mathematics would have impressed a loan shark. While Sage finished her interview with forced optimism, I drove to the courthouse for some old-fashioned detective work. The musty smell of archived documents and the rhythmic scratch of researchers' pencils reminded me of those long nights studying electrical codes, except this time I was investigating criminal fraud instead of voltage calculations. What I discovered made my hands shake with rage. The emergency meeting violated every procedural requirement in the book. State law mandates 48-hour written notice for any proceedings involving property liens. The meeting minutes showed only Cordelia's signature, with the other board members' names forged in handwriting suspiciously identical to hers. Same loops, same pressure, same telltale flourishes I'd noticed on previous documents. But the real bombshell was buried in the property filings. Cordelia had submitted a mechanic's lien supported by fabricated invoices for emergency electrical repairs to common areas. The work orders referenced non-existent contractors during time periods when I could prove no repairs had occurred. Back home, I found Sage crying over her calculus homework, her interview success overshadowed by our uncertain future. That image, my brilliant daughter's dreams threatened by one woman's greed, crystallized my resolve like nothing else could. That's when Harold Morgan appeared at my door carrying salvation in a manila folder. Harold and his late wife Maria had been Pinecrest Estate's founding members, back when the HOA actually served homeowners instead of exploiting them. Maria had kept obsessive records of every meeting, every transaction, every policy change for 15 years, stored in their climate-controlled home office with the dedication of a professional archivist. "Found these after you mentioned the forged signatures," Harold said, settling carefully into my kitchen chair. "Maria documented everything, and I mean everything. The folder contained our community's constitutional documents, The original HOA charter with bylaws that would make Cordelia's recent actions look like what they were, completely illegal. The Founding Fathers had built-in safeguards requiring majority homeowner approval for fee increases, mandatory annual audits, and strict limitations on emergency powers. According to Maria's meticulous records, the last legitimate board election had occurred 3 years ago during a Christmas week meeting attended by exactly 12 residents, far short of the required 50% quorum. Cordelia's entire presidency was based on illegal authority. Every fine, every policy change, every emergency decision since then was legally void. But wait, there's more, Harold said with grim satisfaction, producing bank statements that would make a federal prosecutor salivate. Maria somehow got copies of these before she passed. The financial records revealed systematic embezzlement spanning 4 years, monthly transfers from HOA accounts to Blackwood Ceramics LLC disguised as community expenses. Pool maintenance never performed, landscaping never completed, legal fees for lawyers never consulted, total theft, $127,000 in community funds diverted to finance Cordelia's pottery empire. Harold saved the nuclear option for last. Maria's final documentation, completed just weeks before her fatal heart attack, included photographs of illegal electrical connections between our clubhouse and Cordelia's home workshop. She'd discovered the meter tampering, the jury-rigged power lines, and the industrial kiln consuming electricity billed to 847 innocent families. Maria was going to expose everything at the next board meeting, Harold whispered, his voice thick with regret and the metallic taste of unfinished business. Then she died, and I was too broken to follow through. But watching what Cordelia's doing to your family, Maria would demand justice. I stared at the evidence covering my kitchen table like pieces of an electrical schematic finally making sense. Forged documents, embezzled funds, utility fraud, election violations. Cordelia hadn't just harassed one family. She'd been operating a criminal enterprise for years. My phone buzzed. Tick-tock, 47 hours left. I looked at Harold and felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a main breaker finally clicking into the right position after years of electrical problems. You know what, Harold? She's absolutely right. In 47 hours, someone's definitely going to lose everything they've stolen. Time to stop playing defense and start conducting justice. The nuclear bomb was hiding in a shoebox under Maria Morgan's bed, wrapped in tissue paper like a precious family heirloom. Harold had called me at midnight, his voice shaking with discovery and barely contained rage. You need to see this. Tonight. Maria left something that changes everything. I found him in his kitchen, surrounded by documents spread across every surface like evidence from a federal investigation. The air smelled of stale coffee and old paper mixed with the metallic tang of justice finally within reach. I couldn't sleep, Harold said, hands trembling as he poured coffee that neither of us wanted. Kept thinking about what you said, about patterns and electrical fraud. So I went through Maria's things one more time, really looked this time, not just grieving. What he'd found would have made a federal prosecutor weep with joy. Maria wasn't just keeping HOA records, Harold continued, pulling out a leather-bound ledger marked Insurance Investigation, Confidential. She was building a criminal case. The ledger revealed Maria's secret life as an amateur detective. For 2 years before her death, she'd been systematically documenting what she suspected was massive fraud within our HOA. Bank statements obtained through her treasurer access, photographs taken during early morning surveillance missions, copies of utility bills showing impossible consumption patterns. But the crown jewel was a manila envelope marked, "Smoking gun, open only if something happens to me." Inside was documentation that made my electrician's blood run cold. Cordelia's HOA presidency wasn't just illegitimate, it was completely fabricated. The election that supposedly put her in power had never actually occurred. The Christmas week meeting where 12 people allegedly voted? Maria had checked. The community center was closed that entire week for renovations. She's been forging everything for 3 years, I said, pieces clicking together like a perfectly wired circuit. Board meetings, election results, financial approvals, all of it fictional. Harold nodded grimly. Every fine she's issued, every policy she's enacted, every foreclosure threat, none of it has any legal authority. We've been living under a completely illegitimate dictatorship. But Maria's investigation had uncovered something even more devastating. The electrical theft wasn't limited to Cordelia's pottery business. She'd been systematically stealing power from multiple sources throughout the neighborhood. using her fake HOA authority to hide infrastructure that diverted electricity from streetlights, pool equipment, and even the emergency fire systems. "Look at these calculations," Harold said, showing me Maria's meticulous accounting. 6 years of theft, 847 families overcharged, total fraud approaching $300,000 when you include the embezzlement. The scope was breathtaking. Cordelia hadn't just been running a pottery business on stolen electricity. She'd been operating a criminal enterprise that touched every family in our community. Every inflated electric bill, every mysterious maintenance fee, every emergency assessment had been part of an elaborate money laundering scheme. "There's more," Harold said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Maria suspected she wasn't the first person to discover the fraud. He showed me newspaper clippings Maria had collected about mysterious deaths and sudden departures of previous HOA board members. 3 former treasurers had died of heart attacks over the past decade. 2 board members who'd questioned financial irregularities had moved away suddenly after family emergencies. "Maria thought she was next," Harold said, pointing to her final entry, dated the day before her heart attack. She'd confronted Cordelia privately, threatened to expose everything. That night, she died. The implication hung in the air like smoke from burning electrical insulation. Whether Maria's death was natural or not, the timing had saved Cordelia's criminal empire and condemned our community to years of continued fraud. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because Cordelia's trying to do to your family what she did to everyone who threatened her," Harold said, his eyes hard with determination. "Silence them, discredit them, or drive them away. But this time, she picked the wrong target." I stared at Maria's evidence spread across Harold's kitchen table and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't about my electric bill anymore. It wasn't even about saving my house or protecting Sage's future. This was about justice for every family Cordelia had victimized, every neighbor she'd silenced, every person who'd suffered under her reign of organized crime. "Harold," I said, gathering the documents with steady hands, "we're not just going to expose Cordelia's fraud. We're going to make sure she faces federal charges for every crime she's committed against this community." The victim had just become the prosecutor, and court was about to be in session. My workshop smelled like revolution, coffee grounds mixed with electrical tape adhesive, and the metallic scent of justice finally within reach. Harold arrived at dawn carrying Maria's investigation files in banker's boxes that looked like they'd been through a war zone. Sage transformed my workbench into mission control, her laptop humming as she built spreadsheets that cross-referenced fraud patterns with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. The familiar aroma of brewing coffee mingled with decades of workshop memories as we prepared to dismantle Cordelia's criminal empire one wire at a time. "Okay, team," I announced, channeling 30 years of troubleshooting complex electrical problems. "We're going to approach this like rewiring a house that's been butchered by amateurs. Methodical, thorough, and absolutely bulletproof." Mrs. Martinez joined our conspiracy Tuesday evening, her paralegal background proving more valuable than a fully loaded tool truck. She organized evidence with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades making lawyers look competent, sorting Maria's discoveries into categories that would make federal prosecutors weep with gratitude. 4 pillars of prosecution, Martinez explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen justice delayed but never denied. Financial fraud, utility theft, election violations, and racketeering conspiracy. Each pillar supports the others, and any one of them could put Cordelia away for decades. The financial crimes were Maria's posthumous masterpiece. Bank records documenting $127,000 in systematic embezzlement disguised as community expenses. Pottery business equipment purchased with HOA funds. Vacations charged as board retreat expenses. The paper trail was so obvious it was almost insulting to our intelligence. "Here's something that'll make your skin crawl," Martinez said, pulling out federal sentencing guidelines. "Mail fraud carries 20 years per count, and Cordelia sent fraudulent bills through Postal Service for 4 years. That's potentially 80 counts of federal crimes." My electrical investigation revealed the true scope of Cordelia's theft. Jake Morales had provided meter readings going back 6 years, showing consumption patterns that violated basic physics. Cordelia's pottery kilns were drawing industrial-level power, while her neighbors paid residential rates for electricity they weren't using. Most people don't realize that high-temperature ceramic kilns consume as much electricity as small factories, I explained, sketching load calculations that would have impressed my old trade school instructors. Running multiple kilns around the clock requires industrial electrical service. the kind that costs 10 times residential rates and requires special permits. Sage's digital detective work uncovered Cordelia's online empire. Blackwood Ceramics boasted about professional-grade equipment and industrial firing capabilities while generating over $200,000 in sales. Customer reviews praised the consistently perfect glazing that only comes from high-end commercial kilns. "Dad, look at this," Sage said, pulling up Instagram posts from satisfied customers. She's been advertising studio tours showing off equipment that costs more than most people's cars, all bought with stolen money and powered by stolen electricity. The election fraud was almost comically blatant. Herald had obtained official records proving the Christmas week election was completely fabricated. The community center was closed for renovations. Voting records showed signatures from people who'd moved away months earlier. Some signatures belonged to deceased residents. "Democracy dies in darkness," Herald muttered, examining forged signatures under my workshop magnifying glass. But Maria documented every lie, every fraud, every violation of community trust. Our war room grew more sophisticated daily. Mrs. Hendricks contributed financial records from her brief legitimate tenure as treasurer. Jake supplied utility company fraud reports that would trigger automatic federal investigation. Martinez researched precedent cases where similar HOA fraud resulted in decades-long prison sentences. "We're not just building a case," I realized, staring at evidence covering every surface of my workshop. "We're constructing a federal prosecution that could become a textbook example of how to dismantle organized crime disguised as community governance." The strategy crystallized around giving Cordelia one final choice: public confrontation at next week's community meeting with legitimate authorities present as witnesses. Confess publicly, make full restitution, and face community justice, or refuse accountability and face federal prosecutors armed with evidence that could destroy her life completely. "Why offer any mercy to someone who's shown none?" Sage asked, her 17-year-old sense of justice wrestling with adult complexities. "Because sometimes the most powerful punishment is living with the consequences of your choices," I replied, remembering my father's lessons about both electrical safety and human decency. "Prison would remove Cordelia from our community, public shame and financial ruin while remaining here. That's justice that serves the victims." Martinez nodded with professional approval. "Federal prosecutors prefer cases that compensate victims over expensive incarceration. Community restoration beats individual destruction every time." By Friday night, our evidence could have convicted a dozen criminals. Financial documentation spanning 4 years, utility fraud affecting 847 families, election violations that made banana republics look legitimate, victim statements from 17 families who'd been systematically terrorized. "1 week from tonight," I announced to our assembled team, "Cordelia Blackwood discovers what happens when criminals finally meet consequences." The student had become the teacher, and class was about to begin. Cordelia's desperation arrived Monday morning smelling like expensive perfume mixed with the bitter stench of pure panic. The legal envelope was thick enough to use as body armor, stamped with letterheads from 3 different law firms. Apparently, she'd been attorney shopping like someone trying to find a doctor who'd prescribe addiction medication. The cease and desist letter inside read like it was written by someone who'd learned law from courtroom television dramas, demanding I immediately cease all harassment, surveillance, and defamatory activities. I was reading this legal comedy in my workshop, surrounded by the comforting aroma of metal shavings and honest sweat, when Sage exploded through the door carrying her laptop and wearing the expression of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure. "Dad, Cordelia's having a complete social media meltdown," Sage announced, pulling up Facebook posts that documented a real-time psychological breakdown. "She's been posting paranoid rants every hour since midnight, and it's absolutely beautiful." The posts were a masterclass in self-destruction. Cordelia simultaneously claimed she was being persecuted by conspiracy theorists, while accidentally admitting to running an unlicensed pottery business. She denied any HOA financial irregularities while bragging about her professional ceramic studio and industrial-grade equipment. The woman was literally providing evidence for our federal case while trying to claim innocence. "Wait, it gets better," Sage continued, her teenage joy at watching adult stupidity mixing with the satisfaction of seeing justice approach. "She's been private messaging other residents trying to build an army. Look at the responses." Mrs. Patterson's reply was surgical in its brutality. "Cordelia, you stole $3,000 from me with fake violation fines. Stop contacting me or I'm filing a restraining order." The Hendricks family had been even more direct. "We know you forged our signatures. Expect to hear from our attorney." Tuesday evening brought Cordelia's most desperate gambit yet. Harold Morgan called during dinner, his voice trembling with disbelief and the kind of anger that comes from being personally insulted by criminal stupidity. "She tried to bribe me," Harold announced, skipping any pleasantries. "Showed up at my door with cash, offering $10,000 to dispose of Maria's old paperwork." The mental image of Cordelia standing on Harold's doorstep with bribery money was almost too perfect. During my apprenticeship, I'd learned that when people start throwing money at electrical problems instead of fixing the actual wiring, you know they're both desperate and dangerous. $5,700 bills, Harold continued, his voice thick with disgust. Still had bank wrapper smell. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the envelope. When I refused, she actually said, "Think about what's best for the community, Harold." Wednesday brought evidence that Cordelia had completely abandoned rational thought. She'd hired a private investigator who was apparently trained at the Keystone Cops Academy of Detection. The man had been canvassing our neighborhood asking questions like, "Have you noticed any suspicious electrical activity at the Reed residence?" And, "Does Mr. Morgan seem mentally unstable since his wife's tragic passing?" The investigation backfired with the explosive force of a major electrical short. Instead of finding dirt on our team, the PI accidentally created a neighborhood support network. Families who'd been suffering Cordelia's harassment in isolation started comparing notes and discovering they weren't alone. Mrs. Rodriguez revealed she'd paid $4,000 in fabricated landscaping violation fines rather than fight. The Thompson family admitted to $2,800 in bogus architectural compliance penalties. Even recent arrivals shared stories about intimidating welcome packets filled with violation threats and immediate fine assessments. "She's accidentally organized the entire neighborhood against herself," Martinez observed during our Thursday strategy meeting, her paralegal experience recognizing criminal patterns that would make prosecutors salivate. "Nothing builds community solidarity like discovering you've all been systematically victimized by the same sociopath." Friday morning brought Cordelia's most personal attack yet. I discovered my work truck's tires slashed with surgical precision, deep cuts that spoke of personal hatred rather than random vandalism. The acrid smell of destroyed rubber mixed with morning dew created an olfactory reminder that desperate criminals escalate to violence when legal intimidation fails. My security cameras, the same ones Cordelia had tried to force me to remove months ago, captured everything in high definition. The footage showed her approaching at 3 a.m. with a utility knife, looking around nervously before systematically destroying each tire. Her face was clearly visible, her movements deliberate, her criminal intent undeniable for any jury to see. "She's completely lost touch with reality," Sage said, watching the security footage with fascination. "Look at her expression. That's not calculated harassment anymore. That's pure rage mixed with mental breakdown." The tire slashing revealed someone who'd abandoned any pretense of civilized behavior and descended into criminal revenge. More importantly, it escalated misdemeanor harassment into felony destruction of property, adding years to potential prison sentences. Jake Morales confirmed our suspicions when he called with utility company intelligence that proved Cordelia's complete disconnect from reality. "She's been calling our fraud hotline daily, demanding immediate investigation of your electrical work. Claims you're tampering with neighborhood meters and stealing power." The irony was so beautiful it belonged in a museum. While actively committing massive utility fraud herself, Cordelia was accusing me of crimes she was perpetrating. The utility company's investigation unit was now officially involved, triggering automatic federal notification protocols. Saturday brought Cordelia's nuclear option, a mass email to all 847 residents claiming I posed a clear and present danger to community safety. The message included fabricated neighbor quotes and implied my electrical work had caused mysterious power outages. The community response was immediate and devastating. Dozens of residents replied to the entire distribution list, defending my character and sharing their own Cordelia horror stories. The email chain became a public forum for documenting years of systematic abuse. "She just created a written record of community-wide criminal victimization," Martinez observed with legal appreciation. "Federal prosecutors will use this email thread as evidence that her criminal behavior affected hundreds of families over multiple years." By Sunday evening, Cordelia had managed to commit federal bribery, felony property destruction, criminal harassment, and mass defamation, all while we were building cases against her original crimes. She'd transformed from calculating criminal mastermind into desperate amateur, creating evidence that would guarantee her own destruction. 6 days until the community meeting, I announced to our team, feeling justice approaching like properly flowing electrical current. Cordelia Blackwood is about to discover what happens when criminals run out of places to hide. The reckoning was coming, and she'd wired her own downfall. The smell of sheer panic mixed with expensive legal cologne invaded my workshop Tuesday morning when Harold exploded through the door carrying papers that looked like white flags of surrender. "She's gone nuclear," Harold gasped, still catching his breath from running 3 blocks. Cordelia filed for bankruptcy yesterday, claiming she's being persecuted by vindictive neighbors and faces insurmountable legal costs. I was testing voltage on a circuit breaker when the news hit. The familiar hum of electrical equipment suddenly drowned out by the roaring sound of justice accelerating beyond anyone's control. The acrid scent of heated electrical components seemed to match the burning smell of Cordelia's world collapsing in real time. "Emergency Chapter 7 filing," Harold continued, spreading legal documents across my workbench like evidence from a crime scene. "Claims temporary financial hardship while listing her pottery business as modest supplemental income and household assets as minimal residential property." Sage looked up from monitoring Cordelia's social media meltdown. Her teenage face lit up with the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching adults destroy themselves through their own stupidity. "Dad, she actually posted selfies at the bankruptcy attorney's office with the caption, 'Finally fighting back against neighborhood terrorists.' The irony was so thick you could wire it into the electrical grid. Cordelia was playing victim while using federal bankruptcy laws to shield assets stolen from the very neighbors she was demonizing. But filing bankruptcy while under criminal investigation proved to be Cordelia's most spectacular miscalculation yet. Martinez called within hours, her paralegal voice vibrating with professional excitement that made me think of perfectly tuned electrical equipment hitting optimal frequency. Federal bankruptcy trustees are required to investigate all asset transfers and income sources within 4 years of filing. Cordelia just triggered automatic forensic accounting of every crime we've documented. The bankruptcy petition read like a confession written by someone who'd never heard of the Fifth Amendment. She'd listed Blackwood Ceramics LLC as generating occasional supplemental income from residential hobby activities, directly contradicting years of denying any commercial operations. The filing described her pottery studio as modest, home-based craft area, while photographs showed industrial kilns that consumed more electricity than small factories. She's literally providing prosecutors with signed admissions of guilt, I realized, studying documents that laid out every violation we'd been investigating. Commercial business, zoning violations, unreported income, tax evasion. She's confessing to federal crimes while trying to claim poverty. Wednesday brought the media circus that transformed our neighborhood drama into regional entertainment. Channel 7 news reporter Jennifer Walsh had discovered the bankruptcy filing and connected it to our HOA fraud investigation. Her evening report, "Broke HOA Tyrant Accused of Massive Theft," featured interviews with victimized families and footage of Cordelia's industrial pottery setup. Cordelia's media response revealed someone whose grip on reality had snapped like overloaded electrical wiring. She granted a live television interview portraying herself as a successful female entrepreneur being destroyed by jealous neighbors. The interview included a tour of her garage workshop, proudly displaying equipment that obviously violated every residential zoning law in the state. "She's building the prosecution's case for them," Sage marveled, recording every self-incriminating moment. "Those kilns draw more power than our entire house. She's literally broadcasting evidence of utility fraud to thousands of viewers." Thursday brought confirmation that federal authorities had taken notice of our small-town justice project. Jake called with news that made my electrician's heart pump like a perfectly synchronized motor. FBI Financial Crimes Unit had contacted utility company fraud investigators after Cordelia's bankruptcy filing triggered automatic criminal background checks. When someone claims poverty while under investigation for massive theft, federal prosecutors assume flight risk, Jake explained, his voice carrying the excitement of someone watching justice finally engage at full power. "They're expediting investigation to prevent asset concealment and escape." The federal attention was clearly destroying what remained of Cordelia's judgment. Harold reported midnight sightings of rental trucks at her house, apparently attempting to relocate pottery equipment before authorities could seize assets purchased with stolen money. Our neighborhood security cameras, the same ones she'd tried to ban months ago, captured every desperate moment of her asset concealment attempts. Friday brought Cordelia's most delusional gambit, organizing a community safety meeting at the public library to address ongoing harassment from dangerous neighborhood elements. She'd apparently convinced herself that public opinion could override federal criminal investigation. The meeting became an accidental victim impact hearing. 3 residents showed up to support Cordelia, while 22 families arrived armed with documentation of her systematic fraud. Library staff became unwitting witnesses to testimony about embezzlement, utility theft, election fraud, and years of criminal harassment. She organized her own victims to provide statements for federal prosecutors, Martinez observed with legal appreciation that bordered on awe. Most criminals try to avoid creating evidence. Cordelia's actively manufacturing it. Saturday brought news that Cordelia's desperate strategies had accelerated rather than prevented her destruction. Her bankruptcy attorney had withdrawn after discovering the scope of criminal liability she'd concealed. Utility company fraud investigators had filed formal complaints with FBI and state attorney general. 2 mortgage companies had begun foreclosure proceedings on properties she'd pledged as collateral for undisclosed debts. But Cordelia's final mistake came Sunday evening in the form of a mass email that would have made confession booth priests weep with recognition. She announced her temporary relocation due to community persecution, while promising to return and reclaim everything that was stolen from me. The message inadvertently admitted to flight from jurisdiction while threatening to commit additional crimes upon return. Federal prosecutors would read this as textbook evidence of criminal intent and consciousness of guilt. "She's written her own indictment," I said, printing copies for our evidence vault. "Asset concealment, flight risk, threats of future crimes. Prosecutors couldn't craft better evidence of criminal behavior." Monday morning brought confirmation that justice was approaching with the inevitability of electrical current following the path of least resistance. Federal bankruptcy trustee had frozen all Cordelia's assets. FBI had opened formal criminal investigation. State authorities were preparing election fraud charges. "Tomorrow night," I announced to our team, feeling the perfect satisfaction of a complex electrical problem finally solved, Cordelia Blackwood faces her final choice: public confession and community restitution, or federal prison and complete destruction. The current was flowing, and justice was about to light up the entire neighborhood. The community center crackled with the kind of electricity that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights humming overhead. 274 residents packed shoulder to shoulder while 3 television cameras captured what would become the most explosive HOA meeting in American history. I arrived early, breathing in the intoxicating mixture of anticipation, nervous sweat, and the lingering aroma of institutional coffee that filled spaces where democracy was about to be restored. My evidence binder felt heavier than a fully loaded tool belt, packed with everything needed to complete the most important job of my career: rewiring an entire community's faith in justice. The media circus was already in full swing. Channel 7's Jennifer Walsh commanded the front row with professional lighting equipment. Regional newspapers had dispatched their best investigative reporters. Most importantly, a federal prosecutor sat in the back corner, his presence transforming our neighborhood meeting into something approaching a criminal tribunal. Cordelia's entrance was pure theater. Designer black suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, flanked by an attorney who kept checking his phone like he was expecting evacuation orders from a sinking ship. She surveyed the packed room with the desperate confidence of someone still believing she could control a narrative that had already escaped her grasp. "Before we begin," announced City Council member Roberts, his voice carrying decades of experience with actual democratic processes, "I want to note that federal and state authorities are observing tonight's proceedings. Everything said here is being recorded for potential legal use." Cordelia's face went pale as winter morning frost, but she straightened her shoulders like someone preparing for battle she couldn't win but refused to surrender. Mrs. Martinez approached the microphone first, her paralegal training evident in every precisely organized document. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to present 4 years of systematic financial crimes committed against this community." The overhead projector displayed bank statements that told a story of breathtaking theft, $127,000 embezzled through fabricated expenses, pottery business equipment purchased with HOA funds, vacation cruises charged as board retreats, each transaction meticulously documented with the precision of a criminal prosecutor's dream case. Every resident in this room has been systematically robbed by someone they trusted with community leadership, Martinez announced, her voice carrying across the silent room like electrical current through properly grounded wiring. Cordelia's attorney whispered frantically in her ear, but she stared straight ahead with the frozen expression of someone watching their empire crumble in high definition. Harold Morgan presented the election fraud evidence next, his voice strengthened by 3 years of suppressed grief and delayed justice. My late wife, Maria, documented that Mrs. Blackwood's entire presidency is based on fabricated elections. She has held no legal authority for 3 years. Every fine, every policy, every decision, all of it completely illegitimate. The room erupted like a circuit breaker finally tripping after years of dangerous overload. Residents who'd paid thousands in fraudulent fines realized they'd been victimized by someone with no more authority than any other homeowner. But the electrical fraud evidence was what shattered Cordelia's last vestige of composure. I approached the microphone carrying photographs that would have made any honest electrician weep with professional outrage. The familiar scent of justice mixed with my own nervous energy as I prepared to deliver the technical evidence that would end Cordelia's criminal career permanently. Mrs. Blackwood has been stealing electricity from every family in this community, I announced, projecting images of illegal connections that violated every electrical code in existence. Industrial pottery kilns illegally connected to our shared electrical systems, with residents billed for power they never used. The photographs showed dangerous wiring that endangered lives, jury-rigged connections, tampered meters, and industrial equipment drawing massive power while being disguised as community maintenance expenses. Back when I was learning electrical safety, my father had taught me that such violations weren't just theft, they were potential manslaughter waiting to happen. Total electrical theft, $89,000 over 6 years, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each damning fact. Plus, systematic meter fraud affecting 847 families. Federal investigators classify this as interstate commerce violations carrying mandatory prison sentences. That's when Cordelia's carefully maintained facade finally exploded like overloaded electrical equipment. "This is persecution," she screamed, leaping to her feet with the wild desperation of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "I created value. I maintained standards. I built a successful business while you people argued about petty violations." The room fell silent except for camera motors whirring and the steady electrical hum of recording equipment capturing every self-incriminating word for posterity. "Ma'am," I said with the calm authority of someone who'd finally solved a complex electrical problem, "you didn't build a business. You built a criminal enterprise using stolen money and stolen electricity." But Cordelia was beyond rational thought, her desperation spilling out like sparks from damaged wiring. "I worked harder than any of you. While you complained about fees, I was generating income, creating opportunities, building something meaningful." "With money you stole from 847 families," Sage called out from the front row, her 17-year-old voice cutting through the hysteria with devastating clarity. The Federal Observer rose slowly, his movement commanding absolute attention from every person in the packed room. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Agent Patterson, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I strongly advise you to stop talking immediately." Cordelia looked around the room, finally seeing 274 faces staring at her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. No allies, no supporters, no escape routes remaining in any direction. What do you people want from me?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of complete exposure and inevitable consequences. I stepped back to the microphone, feeling the perfect satisfaction of electrical current flowing exactly where it belonged after years of dangerous short circuits. "We want every stolen dollar returned to the families you robbed," I announced, my voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for an entire community. "Full restitution, public confession, immediate resignation, and complete cooperation with federal prosecution." The silence stretched like a live wire waiting to make contact, broken only by the soft whir of cameras documenting the moment when criminal tyranny finally faced democratic justice. "Mrs. Blackwood," I said, pulling out my phone and setting a countdown timer visible to everyone in the room, "you have exactly 60 seconds to choose between confession and federal prison." The timer began ticking in the absolute silence of 274 people watching justice arrive like electrical current completing its circuit. Tick, tick, tick. Justice had finally come to Pinecrest Estates, and the meter was running. The timer hit 0 in absolute silence that stretched like a live wire waiting to complete its circuit. Cordelia stood frozen, her designer suit wilted with sweat, her carefully constructed facade cracking like overloaded electrical insulation. The packed community center held its collective breath while cameras captured the exact moment when tyranny finally faced the choice between confession and complete annihilation. She whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of recording equipment and the collective heartbeat of 274 people waiting for justice. I may have made some serious accounting errors. Louder, please, Mrs. Martinez said with the firm authority of someone who'd waited years for this moment. Every family deserves to hear this clearly. Cordelia's shoulders collapsed like a house whose electrical system had finally failed completely. I borrowed money from HOA accounts for my pottery business, she said, her voice growing stronger as confession apparently lifted weight from her conscience. I modified electrical connections without permits to power my equipment. I forged signatures on board documents. I charged residents for electricity they didn't use. The admission wasn't complete, but it was enough. Federal Agent Patterson nodded to signal that justice had officially begun its work while residents processed confirmation of crimes they'd suspected for years. 20 minutes later, Cordelia signed restitution agreements witnessed by federal authorities and broadcast live to 3 states. Full repayment, $216,000 including penalties. Immediate resignation. Complete cooperation with ongoing investigations. The criminal empire was officially dismantled. 6 months later, the transformation felt like a neighborhood that had undergone complete electrical renovation. Cordelia's mansion sold quickly to fund victim restitution that restored stolen money to every affected family. Her pottery equipment was liquidated through federal seizure, with proceeds establishing a community legal defense fund. The space where her illegal kilns once operated became a thriving community garden where children now learn about growing vegetables instead of growing up under criminal tyranny. Mrs. Hendricks proved to be the honest, competent leader our community had desperately needed. Monthly financial reports appeared online with complete transparency. Violation procedures included warnings before fines and guaranteed appeals. Property values increased through actual improvement rather than fraudulent manipulation, and new residents chose Pinecrest Estates specifically because of our reputation for ethical governance. My electrician business exploded beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Word spread about the guy who'd electrocuted an HOA tyrant with her own evidence, bringing customers from neighboring counties who appreciated someone willing to fight corruption. I started teaching electrical safety for homeowners at the community college, sharing knowledge that helps families spot utility fraud before it destroys their finances. The most satisfying transformation was watching Sage flourish at State University, studying renewable energy engineering with the passion of someone who'd seen firsthand how electrical systems can be used for good or evil. Her summer internship with utility fraud investigators had convinced her to specialize in grid security and sustainable power systems that no criminal could manipulate. Our story became the viral sensation, how one dad electrocuted an HOA tyrant, inspiring similar investigations across dozens of communities nationwide. The state legislature passed comprehensive HOA reform requiring annual audits and homeowner protections. I testified at the Capitol about preventing future victims, sharing lessons learned from our accidental masterclass in community-based criminal investigation. Federal prosecutors now use our case as training material for utility fraud detection, and 3 other neighborhoods have successfully exposed their own HOA criminal enterprises using our investigation methods. Millions of dollars have been recovered for families who thought they had no recourse against systematic theft disguised as community management. The scholarship fund we created using recovered embezzlement money continues Maria Morgan's legacy of truth-telling and justice. The Maria Morgan Memorial Scholarship supports students pursuing ethics, law, or public service careers, with Sage serving on selection committees during college breaks to ensure Maria's dedication to documentation and accountability inspires future generations. 9 months after Cordelia's public confession, I visited Sarah's grave to share news about our daughter's success and our community's healing. "She's going to change the world, honey," I told the headstone where my wife's memory rests peacefully. "Already talking about running for city council after graduation, probably end up rewiring democracy itself." The experience taught me that protecting family sometimes means fighting battles you'd rather avoid, but standing up to bullies is the only way to ensure they can't victimize others. Real leadership means protecting community even when it's difficult, messy, and personally costly. Cordelia moved across the country after completing restitution, working as a bookkeeper and maintaining a much lower profile. Last Christmas, she sent an unsigned card saying simply, "Thank you for teaching me what I needed to learn." Harold spotted her at a grocery store looking genuinely happier, as if the burden of maintaining criminal deceptions had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Today, Pinecrest Estates serves as a model for honest HOA governance, attracting residents who value transparency and democratic participation. Our annual Community Day celebrates civic engagement while reminding everyone that democracy requires constant vigilance from people willing to ask hard questions about authority and accountability. Last week, speaking at the National HOA Conference, I shared the most important lesson from our journey. Bullies rely on good people staying isolated and silent. But when communities unite around truth and demand accountability, no criminal enterprise can survive the combined power of evidence, democracy, and neighbors who refuse to be victimized. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about preventing future victims and teaching criminals that consequences are inevitable when communities work together. Tonight, Sage and I are teaching neighborhood kids electrical safety in my workshop, surrounded by the comforting aroma of sawdust and the sound of young voices asking smart questions about how power really works. She's planning solar installations that could make our entire community energy independent. Her textbooks spread across the same workbench where we once built the case that brought down a criminal empire. "Dad, want to help design a neighborhood microgrid system?" she asks, eyes bright with the innovation and justice passion that would make her mother proud. "Always ready to learn something new, kiddo," I reply, feeling the perfect satisfaction of circuits completed and communities restored to health. Drop a comment sharing your HOA nightmare. You're not alone, and your experience might help someone else fighting similar battles right now. Knowledge shared is power multiplied, and communities that communicate can protect each other from systematic abuse. Hit subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of ordinary people defeating extraordinary injustice, because everyone deserves to understand their rights and know that standing up to bullies isn't just possible, it's essential for protecting democracy at every level where power touches people's lives. Outside, Pinecrest Estates glows with warm light from homes where families live without fear, where democracy works as designed, and where one electrician's fight became everyone's victory over corruption disguised as community service. Justice flows like electricity. It follows the path of least resistance, but once the circuit connects, nothing can stop it from reaching exactly where it belongs.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.